there is a powerful link between the story of Yaakov praising Hashem for having taken him from the absolute bottom and elevating him to a place of bracha, and the story of Yutis Kislev. So what we're going to see over here is that Yaakov Avinu says, when I crossed over the Yarden, I just had my stick, and there are two opinions. Either that means he only had his stick, or it means he was able to do miraculous things like splitting the Yarden River with his stick, which will introduce us to two realities. The reality of a person who feels that they deserve, for whatever reason, that Hashem should look after them, versus the person who feels that they have to beseech Hashem to look after them. And both of these have space within Yiddishkeit. In fact, that's the ultimate state of dedication and bittul, is when a person realizes, I deserve, and yet I'm going to beseech Hashem anyway, which is a great lesson for us and also an insight into the story of Yutis Kislev. In Pasuk, when Yaakov Avinu says in the Pasuk, I have been diminished or humbled by all of the kindness that Hashem has done for me, he explains that initially when I crossed the Yarden, in other words, leaving home, I just had my stick. And now I've become this massive family with two whole camps, the camp of my family, the camp of all my possessions, etc. So Zayin dot Zwei Pirushim Hovchim, they're two totally opposite translations, explanations of what this means. Aleph the Pirush HaPashut, V'Estaisha Targum and Rashi on Zayin Esh and Pirush. So first you have the simple explanation, which is brought in the translation of Onkelos, and Rashi initially brings it V'Oid as well as others. As Yaakov is übergegangen dem Yarden nicht hobendig mit sich kein Shum Sache ist sein Makel. That it literally means he was stripped of everything, he had been robbed, and he literally had his walking stick in his hand when he crossed the Yarden. Why? Was like them Pirish Komteis as he verted Makli Vartis Yarden as it. So why? Because he was attacked by Eliphaz, and Eliphaz took everything away from him. So according to this interpretation, when he says I crossed the Yarden with just my staff, what it wants to emphasize is ni di chasodim was Vayishlach gitom mit Yaakov no fakert. That doesn't highlight the great kindness of Hashem. In fact, to the contrary, at least in the beginning. Then Bagashme Sorim and Matzav from Yaakov Avinu says, Zariba dem Yarden, these words, Kiva Makli, are not yet talking about the Chasodim. The Chasodim will come later. This is Yaakov reminding himself about how he started off in such an incredibly physically poor space. He only had his stick. Es ist a Hakdome, was ist noch mehr Mavli die Größkeit von dem späteren Chesed von Ve'ata Yisich Lishnei Machnos. If you go with this interpretation, this is building the drama. I had nothing. Now look at Hashem's incredible kindness to me that I have the two camps of family and possessions. Vashet nach dem in Pasuk, which comes later in the Pasuk. So the first interpretation is the words Kiva Makli Avartes Ayarden is to highlight the low base that Yaakov came off. Then there's a different explanation in the Medrash base, the Pirush HaMedrash. Then there's the interpretation of the Medrash, which Rashi also quotes subsequently. As Nosan Makle B'Yarden and Ifka HaYarden, Kiva Makli Avarti means literally with my stick. That's how I crossed the Yarden River. He used his stick in order to split the river open. Was like dem Pirush and halten die Werte B'Makli Avarti Goyme Gufan in von Chaste Hashem. Now if you go with that interpretation, it's the exact opposite. Kiva Makli Avarti as HaYarden is now an expression of Hashem's kindness to him. First interpretation is Kiva Makli Avarti is before Hashem did kindness, when I was still struggling. According to the second explanation, Kiva Makli is a massive kindness that Hashem did to him to create this incredible miracle for him. Now, if you examine it, these are two absolutely contradictory interpretations, because the first interpretation says the words Kiva Makli indicate the greatest poverty and lack, whereas the second interpretation is indicates that Yaakov deserved the greatest miracle, a completely supernatural miracle, over Lashon Chazal, like the Chazal say, commenting on this in Gemara Chulin, look how great Yaakov is. He's the equivalent, it appears, to Moshe and the 600,000 adult Jews that had the sea split for them, and he has the Yarden split for him. So how do you reconcile the two absolutely contradictory interpretations of the same words? Now, there has to be a connection, because if we want to understand what the link and connection is, because as the Rebbe consistently reminds us, if you have multiple interpretations of a word or a pasuk or a concept in Torah, all the multiple interpretations must be linked. So what is the link between what appear to be two totally contradictory interpretations of the words Kiva Makli Avarti es Hayarden? Especially b'fratas b'agodas bereishis kumen ze behemshech ze lo ze. If you have a look in the Medrash Agodas bereishis, so there it brings the two interpretations one after the other, implying that they kind of flow from each other. So to understand how the two could connect, darf man magdim sein dem Loschen von alten Rebben in sein bewusste Igeres Katonti. So in order to understand Yaakov's meaning and intention by saying Katonti, I was humbled and diminished by Hashem's incredible kindness, let's look at how the Alter Rebbe addressed the same wording in his famous letter in Tanya in Igeres HaKodesh. Katonti. Was hat geschrieben kommt from Peterburg nach der Gule von Yudtes Kislev, which is a letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote after being released in Yudtes Kislev from Peterburg. So what does the Alter Rebbe say? Mipnei heyois katan Yaakov b'ma'oid be'oid be'enov, because Yaakov was incredibly humbled in his own self-assessment. Why? Machmas ribei hachasadim, because of the incredible kindnesses, plural, that Hashem had done for him. Ki v'makli chulei, and then he just says the two words from the pasuk, because with my stick, etc. Doesn't tell us the rest of the pasuk. That's as much as we'll extract from the Alter Rebbe's letter that's relevant to our conversation. Now, the Chelek is nicht verstandig. Something here doesn't seem to make sense, doesn't seem clear to us. What's the Alter Rebbe's intention over here? To highlight how much ongoing, incredible kindness Hashem had done to Yaakov, which caused Yaakov to have this feeling of Katonti, being completely humbled. So if the Alter Rebbe's intention is to ramp up how much chesed there is, which will help us to understand how much Katonti there is, surely the Alter Rebbe should have quoted Vader Be'ikr. In fact, the main thing he should have quoted is the Siyam HaKosuk, the conclusion of the pasuk, which speaks about the Chasodim of Varti as Hayarden Hazeh, that he crossed the river, which could have been, according to the Medrash, miraculous. V'ata Yisir Shnei Machnos, which, according to all opinions, is Hashem's kindness, that he's become this incredibly successful person. Why doesn't the Alter Rebbe say that? It just says Kiva Makli, etc. Now, you might want to say, oh, well, we know what Alter Rebbe was referring to. As mit Kiva Makli meint Alter Rebbe on Deiten von eben gebrachten Pirish from Medrash. Maybe the Alter Rebbe knew that we would know the Medrash, and the minute we'd see the words Kiva Makli, we'd remember the Medrash. That it means Yaakov used his staff in order to split the Yarden in the most incredible, miraculous way, and that's Hashem's kindness. Maybe that's your answer, but you can't really give that as an answer for two reasons. Weil es bleibt noch als schwer, verwasset der Mann nicht dem zweiten Ches, was steht im Pasuk, let's even say that the Alter Rebbe relies on the fact that you're familiar with the Medrash, and you know that when you see reference to Yaakov's staff, it means that he used the staff in order to split the Yarden. Great, that's one Chesed. But why ignore the other one that isn't from a Medrash, that's actually from the words in the Pasuk? The Alter Rebbe doesn't mention that at all. That's a very obvious and great kindness that Hashem did to him, that he became hugely successful. Beis ve'ikar, even more of an issue is, let's assume taka, that the Alter Rebbe, by saying Kiva Makli, intended for you to remember the miracle of splitting the Yarden in order to cross, which comes from the Medrash. Don't you think it would have been then logical for the Alter Rebbe to at least conclude that phrase, because that would highlight what the miracle is and the kindness of Hashem. That would have highlighted for us, reminded us what the big miracle associated with the staff is. The Alter Rebbe doesn't even say that. So it's strange that he should just say Kiva Makli and that's it. Now, you'll say, but he says etc., right? And maybe the etc. reminds us of the rest of the pasuk. Even that's not so simple. You can't argue that the Alter Rebbe intended for us to have in mind the whole pasuk. But the Alter Rebbe wanted to keep it brief, so he just quotes the beginning of the pasuk, and then he just puts an etc. for the rest of the pasuk. That also isn't a good enough explanation. For two reasons. The second reason actually being a very important thing to always bear in mind about the nature of etc's in Sfarim. So first of all, warum alef akol ponim noch dem ein Wort ovarti hat man gedacht bringen. Okay, so at least say one word, ovarti. Kiva makli ovarti. Okay, now remember, ovarti means that he had the miracle of crossing the river by splitting the river with his staff. And then put your etc. But besides that, Oib azay is verklärt amol bariches volt gedarf stehen vechule mit avov hamoisif. If the Alter Rebbe really wanted us to pay attention to the rest of the pasuk, he would have said ve chule, not chule. Why? What's the difference? Because chule onavov, anytime that the word etc. in Hebrew is written without the vav, so it's just written chule, is dosabavayis as the hemshach kasuv is nit negea zum teichen hamadubar. That is an indication that the rest of the pasuk is not relevant to our current discussion. So we're just reminding you that there's more to the pasuk, but we're not telling you to check it out because it's not relevant to our conversation. Und das zugem chulei der Gamer ist avon was der Hazal gesagt as kol psuke de la paske Moshe anon le paskinon. So why do you put an etc.? Because we have a tradition from Chazal. The Gemara tells us that if a pasuk was split up by Moshe in a particular way, we have no right to truncate the pasuk. So you got to put the chulei or the Gamer to indicate that there's more to the pasuk. But if the Alter Rebbe intended for us to read further, he would have said ve chulei, and he doesn't. So it's from dem alle move, and that forces us to appreciate as the inin from kiva makri alein that the Alter Rebbe intends to tell us that just the words because with my staff, that's it, without any context, on the inyan vas v'hemshach hakosuf, without the rest of the pasuk, is genug to peil zayin by Yaakov dem katointi, that already awoke or aroused within Yaakov the sense of absolute humility and katointi. Now we have to understand why, because the logic to us is once you have these incredible things done to you, then you feel, wow, did I deserve it? Who am I? But kiva makli on its own, how is that already a reason to feel katointi? So in order to understand that, we're going to see a beautiful explanation that Tzemach Tzedek quotes from the Shalach Kodesh, that actually the word bemakli, the word itself, is a whole concept outside of its direct translation, and that concept will teach us two different versions of how a person could imagine that they would receive brachas from Hashem. The Tzemach Tzedek brings that up in Eira Torah from Shalom. Tzemach Tzedek quotes the Shalom saying as ki v'makli. You take those words, ki v'makli, is Rosh Teva, the letters of those words spell Baruch Kavod Hashem im Koimoi and Lishos Chokivisi Hashem. Two different concepts. Drawing down Hashem's glory from its place, and I await or look forward to Hashem's salvation. The Tzemach Tzedek is Moisef. That's the Shalos. The Tzemach Tzedek now explains that what the Shalos wants to say by these two phrases, Baruch Kavod Hashem im Koimoi and Lishos Chokivisi Hashem, is similar to what the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah or binyan mishpat utzedakah beYaakov ato asisa. The pasuk says that Hashem did for Yaakov mishpat, justice, and tzedakah, charity. Says the Alter Rebbe, what does that mean? That Yaakov, and by extension the Jewish people, have to have two different channels of connection to Hashem. One is mishpat, that which is by the book, and the one is tzedakah, which is, so to speak, benevolent. And therefore says that Tzemach Tzedek v'hainu beiza b'chines Baruch Kavod Hashem im Koimoi v'shiyeh lishoscha kivisi v'chulei. These are the two phrases, as we'll still see. The two phrases Baruch Kavod Hashem im Koimoi and lishoscha, they correlate to mishpat and tzedakah. Now, right now, that probably makes absolutely no sense. So we have to understand what is the difference between mishpat and what is the difference and the difference between tzedakah. So the bin and dem is, the explanation goes as follows: the fact that the pasuk says mishpat and tzedakah you did with Yaakov is moving as by Yaakov and sein Gewinn die beide midas. That tells us clearly that Yaakov experienced both. He experienced Hashem's mishpat and Hashem's tzedakah. Und die Anhage mit dem is euch gewinn sein mishpat sei tzedakah, which indicates that Hashem's interactions with Yaakov included both mishpat and tzedakah, even though they actually appear to be contradictory concepts. Why? Because mishpat meant, as das Semon, kumtem al pidin. Mishpat means if I ask something from Hashem, and He gives it to me from a perspective of mishpat, it means I deserve it, that it's absolutely appropriate that I should get this particular bracha. Und the main von tzedakah is, whereas the intention of tzedakah is the exact opposite. As al pidin mishpat is menim nit mechuyev to geben. Tzedakah implies that you don't owe me anything, you don't have to give me this bracha. No, das wird ihm gegeben als tzedakah, but because you're benevolent, therefore you'll be charitable enough to give me the bracha. Total opposites. Mishpat means I deserve it. Tzedakah means you're good. So how do you accommodate both, and how could Yaakov have two of these experiences happening in his life? Either he deserved Hashem brachas or not. So the Chayra wollte man gekannt sagen, as das setzt sich in Sheiches zu zwei besondere Beginnes. One possible explanation you may want to offer is, we're talking about two different realities over here, two different states. What does that mean? Mitzad the neshama can I modern in yonim by mebishnim b'teras mishpat. If a person is living at a neshama level, well, the neshama can, so to speak, demand almost certain things from Hashem. Say, I deserve these things. I'm a neshama. I'm part of you. The neshama kumen ire in yonim al pi din. The neshama deserves certain things because it is a neshama. And because it's chelek elokam mamash, it deserves brachas and support and influence and whatever it needs. Whereas if a person's looking from the angle and perspective of the reality of the physical body, I don't deserve anything. Physical body doesn't deserve anything, so I have to petition Hashem for tzedakah. Maybe that's the explanation. There's a neshama reality and a body reality. The neshama deserves, the body begs. But that's not good enough. It's not good enough. Why? Look at the word of the pasuk, the specific word in that pasuk. It doesn't say Hashem gave or Hashem influenced or Hashem shared. It says asiso, you did. You did mishpat tzedakah. What's the point of you did? Das heißt, dass beide Midas Hofchies seinen in Scheiches zu demselben Geder Welt von Asisa Asiya Bepeil. That tells you that whether it's the reality of Mishpat, which is the deserved brachas, or the reality of Tzedakah, which is the benevolent brachas, it all fits into the same reality called Asisa. How Hashem engages the practical world, not the spiritual soul world. So we're back to square one. How does Yaakov have both Mishpat and Tzedakah, and apparently simultaneously in his life? And as Borein Dems, the explanation is this. This is a fascinating concept and such an important thing to bear in mind. Dan v'mahalt by a madrega was berechtigt zu monen ashpas atay von obersten mitzad hadin. Let's say that a person is in a position where they have the rights to expect and demand certain things from Hashem by the book. Wie die Gemara sagt auf dem Pasuk, like the Gemara says in Brochus, the Pasuk tells us, that Hashem says, listen to me, you stubborn-hearted people who are distant from tzedakah. So there's two opinions, Rav Shmuel. What does it mean? As the whole world is sustained by Hashem's benevolence, and these people who are distant from Hashem almost by force, bizroya, with Hashem's force. Meaning to say that they don't necessarily deserve to be kept alive, but Hashem kind of forces it on them in a sense. Von deswegen, so there could be a person who's in a position where you say, listen, I'm not forcing Hashem's hand. I deserve it. I deserve the brachas from Hashem. Von deswegen darf man das beten als tzedakah, und wie es steht, lecha Hashem at tzedakah. Even, here's an incredible lesson, even when a person is 100% convinced that they deserve a particular bracha from Hashem, the appropriate way to approach it is asking for tzedakah, not to say, I deserve, but to say, lecha Hashem at tzedakah. Hashem, you are the one who can dish out to me. So in other words, you come from a position of humility, even when you could come from a position of strength. Das ist auch der Tam von Yaakov's Meira for Esav, and this also helps us to understand why Yaakov was afraid of Esav. Why was he afraid? He already had Hashem's assurance that Hashem would be with him and would protect him, so what's he afraid of? You'll say, yeah, well, everybody knows. Rashi tells us clearly, Yaakov was afraid perhaps his service of Hashem was lacking in some way, and therefore he had lost that assurance. Even that you need to understand. What's Yaakov so afraid of? Chazal sagen doch, as Kevin the Gemara Yuma tells us that if a person has gone through most of their life without doing an Aveira, you can assume that they're fairly safe at this point. So what's Yaakov afraid that he sinned? He's at an advanced age already. Yaakov Avinu is no longer a young man. He's certainly more than halfway through his life if you do the calculations. So what's he afraid of? Maybe I've done a sin. He has nothing to be afraid of. So why is he concerned about Esav? Most of his years have passed in spiritual health. What's he worried about? The only time that a person would have confidence is when a person takes themselves seriously. Und der Fall kann der Cheshbonim bringen zu der Maskona says Yotzeroiv Shnoisav V'loi Chota. When a person takes themselves seriously, they can say, look, here's the reality. I checked my record, and I've lived the majority of my life without sin. I'm good. For which reason, the person will believe, you know what, I'm not going to sin ever again. And if he's one of the stubborn people, so to speak, that the Gemara spoke about, he could say, hey, I'm going to insist that Hashem gives me what I need, not in a way of tzedakah, but kind of with a firm resolution, because I deserve it. That would happen to a person who takes themselves seriously, who considers their own ego. So they make their cheshbon hanefesh and say, I deserve, I want, I need, I have rights. But when a person has true submission to Hashem, which means that the person takes themselves as nothing. I'm nothing. I am nothing. Hashem is everything. Such a person has such a bittul dika self-perspective that they feel, maybe I'm still lacking. Not chata that I did an aveira. Chata from the lashon chesaron. Maybe I'm lacking something. Person worries, maybe there's something still lacking in my avodah. So therefore, because the person consistently wonders, perhaps I'm not as perfect in my service of Hashem as I should be, maybe I need the brachas to come in a way of tzedakah, benevolence. So that would explain Yaakov's attitude. Yaakov has such bittul that he says, I don't know, I can't make demands of Hashem. I can only petition Hashem to show me compassion and give me the brachas that I need. Sabanit moving, but that's still not fully clear. Wie bald as der bittul von Yaakov und hat es gebracht zu dem Eufen von tzedakah. So, okay, now we get it, right? Now you've told me that Yaakov lives in a world where he understands that he's got complete bittul and therefore relies on Hashem's good graces in order to get brachas. That explains why there should be tzedakah in his life. So now, how do you explain the full pasuk? Tovi zokmen mishpat tzedakah beYaakov gomer. So then why does the pasuk say that he also has mishpat, which implies the ability to be able to demand and insist? Was von dem is mashma, which implies as is given by Yaakov and Mamela as is davs and euch dem Eufen for mishpat. That indicates that Yaakov deserved and in fact employed the attitude of mishpat. So that doesn't make sense. Till now was a beautiful explanation, right? That even if I'm in a position that I could demand of Hashem, I'm still going to have the bittul to step back and say, rather give me tzedakah. So why mishpat then by Yaakov? Is there inyan bezeh? The explanation is pshas men is beemes or this is nidmalekein. In a matzev was beten by mebischen blois al tzedakah. Let's say that a person is in a position where their reality is that all they could do is ask Hashem for compassion because they can't make any demands. Or even if they could make demands, but in their mind and perspective they believe that they can only ask Hashem for tzedakah. Well, we don't know then that it's bittul. Maybe the person has no choice. The person in their mind knows, I cannot make a demand of Hashem. Okay, so now the fact that you're asking Hashem for compassion doesn't tell me you have bittul, it tells me you have no options. You can only ask for tzedakah. Boy mek yoiser. One step deeper. Das is leit sein bittul dike metzius umedida vehagbola. Let's even say that the person has a certain amount of bittul, and their bittul creates some kind of personal restrictions on their either perception of self or their ability to so-called demand of Hashem. So therefore they're saying, okay, please give me what I need. So if a person is going to now approach Hashem from a position, so to speak, of weakness and say, I don't deserve, please would you help me? So you're coming from a limited perspective, so the response you're going to get is limited tzedakah. As we know, actually, the practical application of tzedakah is to assist a person to fill their need, to fill their specific gap, what they individually lack. But you, the benefactor, you have no requirement to now make this person into a wealthy person. They don't have clothes, give them clothes. They don't have food, give them food. So your obligation, according to tzedakah, is to be relative to the needs of the individual as they are in their reality. In was is eingewohnt, relative to what they're used to. Now, it is possible that what a person was used to was a huge amount of things, right? Like you got to give him a horse to ride on, etc. But it's still relative to what that person was used to. Let's say that there was a person who was used to having a horse to ride on and various page boys going ahead announcing his arrival, heralds, whatever you call them. You got to give it to him. But you don't have to give him more than that. So again, what happens with the realm of tzedakah? The realm of tzedakah is that you reach out to somebody and say, I need. And they say, fine, I'll fill your need. But it's only going to be as big as your need. Shah says in Amasim Tzis Voser is very zu bakum dashvos. Over mele kenes emonim betoiras mishpat. But if a person is in a different state where they can claim that they deserve connection, they deserve hashpah, they deserve bracha, und doch kommt zum Eberstein, and in spite of the fact that the person knows that they have on what to rely and to say, I deserve, nevertheless they don't take that route, but instead come with bittul, nicht mit der Tfir von Mishpat, not making demands based on what the book says they should be getting, not mit der bakosha als tzedakah, but instead they take an approach of request from a tzedakah perspective. So that tells me this person has now left the reality of their own self with all of its limitations. Again, person who feels that I'm lacking, so okay, I feel this is how much I need, this is how much I lack. Okay, we'll give you how much you need. The person who says, I deserve, and in spite of the fact that I deserve, I'll relinquish my argument in favor of what I deserve, and instead come with complete bittul. That person has let go of all cheshbonos, all calculations, all definitions of what they deserve. Und demult is der Spaß hat stocken even von der Meile medide vehagbala, in which case the response from Hashem is that they receive something that also has no limits. Was ist nicht verbunden mit sein Metzias. It's not going to be the kind of bracha suited to that individual and his or her circumstances. And therefore, it's not relative to his or her particular lack that they're lacking. So these are now two different realities, right? One attitude is, I need, I lack, please give me. The second is to have a certain stolz, like a certain strength, to be able to say, I deserve. But the chapa is not to claim based on what you deserve, but rather to say, in spite of what I deserve, I'm still going to request in a humble bitteltik way, which opens up channels that are completely unlimited. Seine matim zu die zwei Yonim take us right back to the two concepts that Tzemach Tzedek quoted from the Shalach Kadosh. The one attitude which is, I hope Hashem for your salvation, and the second is bringing down Hashem's glory, so to speak, from its place. The person says is saying, I have no power in this. I'm waiting for your salvation. It's in your hands. You, Hashem, are going to help me. And the reason he does is because he says, I don't deserve anything. Because the person feels acutely that I don't deserve anything, therefore the person feels it's completely in your hands. I'm completely reliant on you. That's the first state, right? The first state is, why does the person come begging? Because they feel they have no choice. Whereas when a person takes the attitude of drawing down Hashem's glory, which means effectively a, so to speak, a ray of Hashem's greatness, that's completely different. This is talking about somebody who's able to draw down from Hashem's place. What does that mean? That means that a person is able to, so to speak, get into the real reality of Hashem's glory, meaning to bring down something that belongs to Hashem down into my reality. I'm waiting for Hashem. You're going to do for me what I need in my world. Baruch Kavod Hashem means I'm reaching into your world, Hashem, and bringing something down from your world into my reality. That that indicates that I'm able to draw absolute infinity down into my space. Was wird aufgetan durch den Bittel hametzius von der Abirei Lev Archaikim mit Tzedakah. That is achieved through the people who are Abirei Lev. They have on what to claim from Hashem, and nevertheless, they ask for tzedakah. Now we can understand why the Alter Rebbe's language with regards to describing Yaakov is Yaakov cotton Yaakov im oid me oid be'einav machmas ribech sodin kivem makri chole. Now we understand the Alter Rebbe's language, which is because Yaakov is very, very small in his own eyes because of his staff. Without getting into the rest of the pasuk, which is the details of either splitting the river or now having this massive family and possessions. Because durch dem was bei Yaakov and seinen gewend die beide hafchestige beginnes von Mishpat und Tzedakah, what Alter Rebbe wants us to know is because Yaakov possessed the two paradoxical states of Mishpat and Tzedakah, welche seine merumas in Kiva Makri Canal, which are all alluded to in Kiva Makri, being the abbreviations of the two psukim, or the two phrases, Lishascha Kivis Hashem Baruch Ved Hashem Im Kaimai. Ote delangt in the madrega vu Allah shpois an bevchines chasodim and riboy hachasodim, because Yaakov Avinu was at such an incredible level, meaning to say that he could have demanded of Hashem, and yet he had the bittul not to demand, but rather to petition Hashem from a perspective of tzedakah. Therefore, he opened up this channel of bli gvul chasodim, absolute infinite kindness from Hashem. He was able to unlock what is alluded to in the phrase Baruch Kved Hashem Im Kaimai, unlimited flow of bracha from Hashem. So now we know that this access that Yaakov got to these unfettered brachas was because of Kiva Makri, which represents the combination of the two attitudes. I could insist, but instead I have bittul to request. It's a completely different story of Katonti. Not Katonti, Hashem, you were good to me, you were nice to me, and therefore I'm a little, I'm overwhelmed by your goodness. No, it's Kirvas Elikim, he came so close to Hashem with this complete bittul, and that kind of absolute closeness to Hashem creates absolute sense of humility, absolute sense of bittul. And that's why the Alter Rebbe continues to say, the fact that Yaakov was so incredibly small in his own eyes because of the riboy, meaning the unlimited chasadim, kive makli chulei, is therefore that's why he had the attitude of, I don't deserve necessarily to be saved from Esav. To borrow the expression of Chazal, he had the impression, maybe I'm lacking in my avodah. What does that mean? Because Yaakov had absolute, the nth degree of bittul to Hashem. That allowed him to reach and to access a space, a level of godliness where human endeavor could never reach. Und der Fall is nidme be'einav shechoto, which is why he would think, I'm always lacking. What does it mean, always lacking? It means to say he's reaching a degree that humans could never reach, so you'll always lack. You'll always feel, I can't get to that finish line. Which means that his personal avodah never rated in his world. It's not like, oh, I've achieved this, I've achieved that, it doesn't matter. You've achieved a whole lot of finite things on an infinite scale. You're trying to reach that which human endeavor can never reach. So you'll always feel not just lacking, but infinitely distant from the goal. Das ist der Keshet zwischen die zwei Pirushim auf die Werte Kiva Makri. That helps us to understand what we initially thought were two contradictory interpretations of Kiva Makri. Either it's just simply I had nothing, just a stick, or I'm doing incredible miracles and splitting rivers. The simple explanation, just the stick, or in the Medrash interpretation that he did this incredible miracle of splitting the river. The two of them together give us the paradoxical reality that Yaakov lived. Mitzad echod, ot gar nicht gehabt, und bet my maybe nor als stuck. On one hand, Yaakov is, I've just got a stick in my hand. I have nothing. Complete bittul. I have nothing. I deserve nothing. I'm a million miles away from where I need to be, and therefore I rely completely on Hashem's kindness and tzedakah. Und leidach, here on the other hand, because of that, steht in Azad der Hebene Darge, he's at such a lofty level, besevert sein die Anhoganisus von Nifka Yarden, for which he deserves the most incredible miracle, splitting open the Yarden, was das Gufa beweist, as is rots oben der Spoisach Sodom Beteras Mishpat, which actually tells us he deserves Hashem's kindness. He deserves Hashem's miracles. This is the paradoxical reality of Yaakov. There is what he really deserves and how he views himself. Und der Mishpat und Tzedakah b'Yaakov atos sisa. So that's the meaning of the pasuk that says Mishpat and Tzedakah, both of them were done for you, with you, Yaakov. Was hat Gerim given as the beginner von Katonti soll sein betachlis hashlemus, which was able to effect that the Katonti, the bittul, the smallness of Yaakov would be absolute. Das is given the Akdama v'Achana, and so mekuyim werden die Tefillah. It's that complete self-effacement, that complete self-surrender, which opened the channels that he should have the greatest protection and bracha. Leini no gomer, that Hashem would save him from Esav, that Hashem would help him to expand and grow, to the extent that he would grow beyond all limitations, like this grains of sand that cannot be counted. So that's going to teach us a personal lesson. Says jeder Id hat Birusha Mein von der Avodas was ein Gewinn by the Avos. It's well known that the stories which tell us the Avodah of the Avos all replicate in our DNA. Ein kein Avos lelishloisha, something which is unique only to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, not the Shvatim or Nevi'im, etc. Was von dem is moving binyonein, which is going to teach us something relevant in context of what we're learning over here. As need blois is jeder Id roit zu beten beim Eibischen Hashpas achesed al tzedakah. Not only is it that every one of us is in a position that we could ask Hashem to give us things that we don't necessarily deserve. That's not such a big chiddush for us. What's fascinating for us is that every single one of us as Jewish people actually has the right to insist on those brachas from Hashem. How so? As we well know, the Gemara tells us that the entire Jewish nation is royalty. For which reason, as the Frierdiker Rebbe once expressed, because we're all royalty, so even if you make us do something which is slightly uncomfortable, that is considered as if you were making us do hard labor. Because we didn't choose to be royalty, Hashem elected us and selected us to be royalty, therefore we deserve every bracha in abundance in every area of life. The Alter Rebbe says in Torah, like the Alter Rebbe says in Torah, a massive kal v'chomer. As ma doch Nebuchadnezzar was gegangen gimel psislich veidamokem. Look at the story of Nebuchadnezzar, that there was a letter that when he was, like, so to speak, the royal scribe, there was a letter that was sent to Chizkiyahu, and the letter, it didn't address Hashem with the right respect. And he went chasing after the messenger to retrieve the letter, and for that he was rewarded. He took a few steps. He was rewarded that for every step he took, he had a generation of rule, dominion over the world. That's Nebuchadnezzar, Harasha. So how much more so for the Jewish people? There's no question that there's not a single Jewish person who has not shown tremendous respect to Hashem. Is cult of Olam Hazeh Kedai Hu Loi. Every single one of us deserves the abundance of all the brachas that the world has to offer. You'll say, so why don't we see that? And you'll see that the Yidden who do have difficulty and suffering in this world, that, as the Alter Rebbe explains, is to help us break our animalistic spirit, help us break down our materialism in order to expose the neshama. But when a Yid reaches the stage where, like Yaakov, he deserves mishpat u'tzedakah, which means, as a gamer is ver b'teras mishpat, that even though he knows he deserves brachas, still he has the bittul to say, I'm not going to throw my weight around or use my credentials. Instead, I'm going to have the humble request from Hashem, please give me what brachas I need. That would be an indicator that the person has achieved a state of meaningful bittul submission to Hashem. That opens up a channel for Hashem's brachas from their infinite space. That opens up totally unlimited success and bracha in everything that a person does. In the realm of family, in the realm of health, in the realm of finance, in an ofen von revicha, all of them in the most broad, abundant way. And all of the distractions and the disturbances are removed, that you can enjoy actually the peaceful tranquility of this world. And this is the specific connection between this theme and these messages and Yutis Kislev. The Alter Rebbe hat sich meisen nefesh given of hafotzes pnimius HaTorah. As we well know, the Alter Rebbe put his life on the line, both materially and spiritually, in order to spread Chassidus as far as possible. Sich abgerissen von seinen Jonim gedem mefis sein terech Chassidus bezoich in Chutza. The Alter Rebbe literally ripped himself away from all the other things that he would have appreciated and enjoyed in order to share Chassidus everywhere. There's no question that Alter Rebbe could have insisted that he deserved to be freed from prison. So he could have demanded of Hashem, after all the mysterious nefesh I've had, I deserve to be freed, but he didn't. He asked specifically to receive that geula in a way of tzedakah. As the Alter Rebbe writes extensively, that his geula was Hashem's absolute kindness. Because the Alter Rebbe, who could have demanded mishpat and instead requested tzedakah, that's why the nature of his geula was b'shalom. What does b'shalom mean? As his given the snagdos of Chassidus, the opposition to Chassidus dissolved. To the extent that those who previously opposed him supported him, and in a peaceful way. But the pasuk is Messiah, kiberabim hoyu imodi, like the pasuk there in Tehillim says, kiberabim hoyu imodi, that even those who were the many opponents now became the supporters. So it's a great lesson for us, that even if we feel that there's certain things we could insist to have from Hashem, the minute we have that experience of bittul and say, give it to us please, in a way of chesed, that opens up channels of absolute gvul. We should have in Hashem those channels in all the things that we need, begashmis, and of course the greatest of all, to have the geula shlema right now.